remember exactly how that day started. It was my birthday, and the excitement was all over my face the moment I opened my eyes. It wasn't just another birthday. It was the birthday. I had planned every detail of the party for weeks, from the venue to the uninterrupted playlist. It was my chance to gather everyone I loved or thought I loved in one place. I wanted everything to be perfect, and I spared no effort. I spent a significant portion of my savings on the decorations, the buffet, and even personalized party favors that I was sure the guests would love. Birthdays always had a special meaning for me. They weren't just another year of life. They were milestones, a sort of checkpoint where I could reflect on everything I'd achieved and what I still needed to change. At 26 years old, I thought I was living in a stable phase with an organized life, at least on the surface. Living alone was an accomplishment I was proud to show off. My small, cozy apartment was my fortress. Every detail reflected who I was, or who I thought I was, from the colorful pillows in the living room to the vanilla scent that filled the air. Additionally, my job as a financial analyst gave me enough stability to support the independence I valued so much. I could afford the things I liked, take occasional trips, and, of course, organize a party like this. When it came to friendships, I always considered myself lucky. There was Clara, my best friend, who had been with me through the most challenging times of my life. The one who held my hand when I thought I couldn't handle another disappointment or when life's burdens threatened to suffocate me. She always said, "Girl, you deserve the world." And on that day, I believed I had at least a part of it in my hands. Clara was a fundamental part of organizing the party. I trusted her blindly. It was as if she knew exactly what I needed, often before I even realized it. "It's going to be epic," she would say with a radiant smile as we discussed every detail, from the perfect lighting to the must-have songs for the playlist. When she suggested inviting some people outside of our usual circle, I hesitated for a moment but quickly agreed. Clara had this way of convincing me that whatever she said was the right thing to do. The guest list was prepared with the utmost care. Besides my closest friends and family, I included a few co-workers and even that guy from the coffee shop who always struck up conversations with me but whom I'd never had the courage to ask out. It was an interesting mix of people who, in my mind, would make everyone feel comfortable, breaking the ice with jokes and entertaining stories. For a moment, I watched her from afar, thinking about how lucky I was to have a friend like her. Clara was more than a best friend. She was almost an extension of myself. The guests began to form small groups throughout the apartment. Some gathered on the balcony, admiring the city lights, while others chatted animatedly in the kitchen, helping themselves to snacks and refilling their glasses. My co-workers seemed to be getting along well with my childhood friends, which was a relief. I always got nervous about mixing people from different parts of my life, but that night, it seemed like everyone was getting along like old friends. However, amidst all this harmony, small details started to catch my attention. One particular group in the corner of the room seemed a bit out of place. Their laughter was too loud, yet it didn't feel genuine. It was as if something unspoken lingered between them, something they didn't want to share with the rest of us. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to my imagination or the natural nerves of being the host. At another point, I noticed Clara deep in conversation with one of the guests I didn't know well. She was gesturing more than usual, and her tone seemed serious, but as soon as she saw me looking, her demeanor changed entirely, and she flashed me a calm smile. "Is everything okay?" I asked curiously, but she just laughed and replied, "Of course. Just organizing some surprises." I accepted that without question. After all, Clara loved surprises, and I knew she enjoyed catching me off guard on special occasions. But now that I think about it, that specific exchange of looks felt different, something I chose to ignore at the time. As more people arrived, the party seemed to take on a life of its own. Some guests I didn't even recognize started showing up, which made me feel a bit uneasy. When I asked Clara about it, she shrugged and said they were friends of friends, just people who wanted to join in and bring good energy to the night. I wanted to believe her. After all, it was my birthday, and I wanted it to be unforgettable, in the best way possible. The music picked up and someone suggested dancing. I, never much of a dancer, let myself get carried away by the moment. Laughing and letting loose in a way I hadn't in years. I felt something I can only describe as freedom. For a few minutes, I forgot about any potential worries or odd details I had noticed earlier. It was all about joy, about celebrating the present. But even in the middle of that euphoria, other details began to emerge. Out on the balcony, a group seemed to be whispering about something, occasionally glancing in my direction. One of the guests, visibly more intoxicated than expected, began drawing attention with exaggerated laughter and behavior that bordered on inappropriate. Then came the moment when Clara offered me a drink she claimed was totally me. It was colorful and pretty, and I didn't think twice before taking a sip. The flavor was sweet but had a bitter aftertaste that lingered longer than I liked. When I looked at Clara, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I asked what it was, and she replied with a grin, "A special cocktail for a special person." Despite everything seeming fine on the surface, something in the air felt off. That nagging sensation that I was out of my element, that something didn't fit. Have you ever felt that? Like everything looks perfect, but there's an invisible tension, something you can't quite put your finger on. That was exactly how I felt. The party carried on, the smiles were still there, but I started to sense that not everything was as it seemed. It was as if behind every laugh, there were secrets being kept. And while I tried to enjoy the night, something inside me was already bracing for what was to come. The atmosphere seemed to be running smoothly. The music kept the vibe lively, guests laughed, and the energy of the party was contagious. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the night would go exactly as I had planned. But, you know that feeling when something feels wrong even though everything looks perfect? That was exactly how I started to feel, though I couldn't explain why. I was in the kitchen replenishing the drinks when I heard raised voices coming from the living room. They weren't laughs or animated conversations, but something more intense, like a muffled argument. My first instinct was to ignore it. I thought it might just be a small disagreement, nothing that required my attention. But curiosity got the better of me, and I went to check. When I arrived, I saw a group of people I barely knew. In fact, I had no idea who they were. They were arguing about something with a fervor that stopped as soon as they noticed me. "Is everything okay here?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but the answer came quickly and curtly. "Yes, of course." They laughed, but it was that nervous kind of laughter that convinces no one. I returned to the kitchen, trying to shake off the unease. Clara was nearby, adjusting some appetizers and laughing with another group. When I asked about the strangers, she brushed it off with her usual carefree tone. "They're friends of friends. Relax, it's going to be fun." I wanted to believe her. I always trusted Clara, but that night something about her felt different. Soon, I started noticing behaviors that made me even more uncomfortable. Out on the balcony, a small group had gathered, exchanging glances and giggles while holding small packages in their hands. My heart sank. I didn't need much to figure out what it was. Drugs. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I never imagined something like that could happen at my party in my space. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the positive aspects of the party, but it was impossible. Some guests were visibly altered, and it wasn't just from the alcohol. Behaviors started spiraling out of control. One guy spilled a glass of wine on my white couch and just laughed, as if it was nothing. Another person was so drunk they could barely stand, stumbling and bumping into other guests. Then the worst of it hit me. One of my closest friends, Letitia, seemed visibly uncomfortable with the advances of a man Clara had brought to the party. He was clearly drunk and invading her space in a way that made me shiver. Letitia tried to distance herself, but he kept closing in, persistent. My instinct was to intervene, but before I could, Clara stepped in. She brushed the guy off with an irritated expression, saying something like, "Don't ruin the night." The situation seemed to settle in that moment, but the unease lingered. Meanwhile, the guests I knew best were starting to look out of place. My co-workers huddled in the kitchen, clearly uncomfortable with how the party was unfolding. Some of my childhood friends were trying to keep things light-hearted, but I could see in their eyes that they felt something was off. And me, I felt utterly powerless. It was as if the party had taken on a life of its own, a monster I couldn't control. Clara, on the other hand, seemed to be having the time of her life. She danced with a group of people I didn't know, laughing loudly and acting like nothing was wrong. When I finally managed to talk to her, I tried to express my concerns. "Clara, I think things are getting out of hand." Her response was swift and dismissive. "You need to relax. It's your birthday, enjoy it." That comment left me disarmed. Was I overreacting? Was I the problem? I tried convincing myself that everything was fine, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Then came the breaking point. As I moved through the living room, I saw Clara in a corner with one of the strangers. They were whispering, and as I approached, she quickly changed the subject. My heart sank. Clara, the person I trusted most, seemed to be involved in something I couldn't fully grasp. In that moment, I realized that my party, a celebration meant to be filled with joy and triumph, had turned into a nightmare. And the worst part was knowing that the night's worst revelations were still to come. The mood of the party had completely shifted. What began as a celebration full of joy and good energy now felt heavy and unsettling. The laughter, which once filled the room so genuinely, had become forced, almost artificial. The music, which had initially energized the guests, now seemed too loud, grating, and out of place. I could no longer ignore the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the party had slipped entirely out of my control, leaving me stuck in a scene I no longer recognized. I was in the kitchen, trying to tidy up what was left of the appetizer table, when I heard a commotion in the living room. It was a mix of raised voices and nervous laughter, but there was a different tone, something more intense. My heart raced as I walked quickly toward the sound, trying not to imagine the worst. But what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Letitia, one of my closest friends, was being cornered by one of the men Clara had invited. He was clearly drunk, but it wasn't just that. The way he leaned into her, his face far too close and his murmured words, sent a shiver down my spine. Letitia looked visibly uncomfortable, her arms crossed and body angled away from him, trying to escape without drawing too much attention. For a moment I hesitated. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I couldn't just stand there and ignore it. I took a deep breath, summoning courage, and approached. "Is everything okay here?" I asked, my voice firm but with an edge of nervousness I couldn't fully hide. The man turned slowly, flashing a mocking smile that only fueled my anger. "Of course everything's fine," he replied, his tone dripping with fake sincerity. Letitia seized the opportunity to slip away quickly, heading toward the hallway. I followed her with my eyes as she disappeared toward the bathroom. Meanwhile, the man stayed put, watching me with that same taunting smile. Before I could say anything else, Clara appeared. She assessed the situation for a second, as if deciding whether it was worth intervening, and then smiled casually. "Come on everyone, let's keep things light, okay? It's a party." I was speechless. How could she treat this with such indifference? Letitia had been visibly shaken, and Clara acted as if it were just a minor inconvenience. Without a word I went after Letitia. I knocked on the bathroom door. When she opened it, I saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were red, and her expression was one of pure frustration. "I don't know what's happening with this party," she said, her voice trembling. "That guy wouldn't stop saying horrible things trying to trap me. And Clara. She saw it all and did absolutely nothing." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and it only deepened my anger and my guilt. I wanted to hug her to tell her she was safe now, but I knew those words would feel hollow. "I shouldn't have come," she murmured, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry, Letitia," I said, trying to hold back the tears welling up in my own eyes. "I promise this won't happen again." Back in the living room, the atmosphere had worsened. The same man was now targeting another guest, a woman I barely knew. She tried to maintain her composure, but her body language made it clear she wanted to get away. My heart sank even further. I went straight to Clara, who was surrounded by her friends. "Clara, this has to stop. That guy is completely out of control, and I won't tolerate this behavior here," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. She looked at me with a mix of irritation and disbelief, as if I were overreacting or ruining her night. "You're being dramatic, girl. He's just a little drunk. Relax, okay?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Clara, the person I trusted most, was downplaying an assault in my own home. My voice trembled, but I stood firm. "Clara, he's harassing people. This isn't just being drunk. He needs to leave. Now." Without waiting for her response, I approached the man directly. My heart was racing, but I gathered all the courage I could muster and said, "You need to leave. Now." He looked at me with that same smug smile, as if nothing I said mattered. The silence in the room was suffocating for a few seconds, but finally, he left, muttering something under his breath that I chose to ignore. After he was gone, the environment felt a bit calmer, but the damage had already been done. The sense of safety that once came so naturally in my home had completely vanished. I felt invaded, betrayed. Not just by the man's behavior, but by Clara's lack of support. Letitia came to me before leaving and hugged me. "Thank you for standing up for me, but I expected more from Clara. This isn't the kind of thing you expect at a birthday party." I stayed silent because, deep down, I had expected more too. After Letitia left, I went to collect a few glasses from the balcony, trying to process everything that had happened. There, I saw Clara laughing with the rest of her group, as if nothing had occurred. She seemed entirely detached from the impact of the night's events. As I cleaned up the last traces of chaos, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. But deep down, I knew that night still had more truths to reveal, and that the worst was yet to come. The party was winding down, but the emptiness I felt inside only grew. The scene around me was chaotic. Glasses scattered across the room, leftover food abandoned in random corners, deflated balloons, and decorations that, once vibrant, now seemed as lifeless as my mood. I felt exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. Something within me had broken that night, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, my thoughts kept circling back to Clara. Clara was on the balcony, surrounded by a few of the guests she had brought, laughing as if nothing had happened. As I collected glasses from the table, I couldn't help but watch her from a distance. She seemed carefree, completely oblivious to the chaos and discomfort that had consumed the party. That scene bothered me more than I wanted to admit. How could she act as if everything was fine? As if she hadn't witnessed the horrible moments I'd endured that night. As I cleaned up, I heard her voice coming from the balcony. At first I tried to ignore it, but something made me stop and listen. "She's so dramatic, isn't she? Always needing everything to revolve around her. Honestly, this party was a drag. I only did this because I was tired of hearing her complaints. Maybe now she'll learn something." Froze. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Clara was talking about me, and in such a cruel, calculated way. The person I trusted most in the world, who knew all my insecurities and fears, was mocking me in front of others. My heart raced, and a wave of indignation and sadness overwhelmed me. I tried to step away and focus on cleaning up the mess, but it was impossible to shake what I had just heard. My mind was flooded with memories. Every time Clara had been there for me, when I believed she was the only person I could rely on. I thought of how she had supported me through breakups, held my hand during my most vulnerable moments, and now it all felt like a lie. As I moved through the room, I passed a few friends who were still there. They looked tired, uneasy, and like me, ready to leave. Some tried to make small talk, but I barely heard them. My thoughts were consumed by Clara's words, echoing in my mind like a cruel mantra. When the last of the guests began to leave, I knew it was time to confront her. I needed answers. I couldn't let this slide. I waited until her group on the balcony thinned out, and then I approached her. "Clara, can we talk?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. She looked at me with an expression of impatience, as if I were interrupting something important. "Sure," she replied unenthusiastically, and she followed me to the kitchen. I closed the door behind us, hoping to keep any prying eyes or ears out of the conversation. "I need to understand what's going on," I began, my voice trembling. "Why did you act the way you did during the party? Why didn't you step in when Letitia needed help? And most importantly, why were you talking about me behind my back?" Clara crossed her arms and stared at me coldly. "Seriously, this is what you're upset about? You're making everything into a drama again. Letitia was overreacting and you know it. And as for what I said about you, maybe it's time you hear some hard truths. You always need everything to revolve around you. This party was just another excuse for you to play the victim." Her words were like knives, each one sharper than the last. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I trusted you, Clara. You were my best friend. How could you say those things?" She shrugged as if it meant nothing. "Because they're true. Maybe it's time you grow up and realize the world doesn't revolve around you." I was speechless, stunned. It was as if Clara had ripped away everything I believed about our friendship. I watched as she walked out of the kitchen, back to the balcony, with the same carefree smile she had worn all night. And there I stood, alone, surrounded by the remnants of the party. Each empty glass, each fallen decoration, felt like a symbol of what my friendship with Clara had become. Something that was once full of life but now lay in ruins. I continued cleaning, trying to distract myself, but the pain and sense of betrayal were suffocating. As I tidied up, I thought about all the moments Clara and I had shared. The late-night conversations, the trips, the times when it felt like she was the only person who truly understood me. How could all of that have been so shallow? Had she always been this way, and I just refused to see it? Gradually, I began to realize that this night wasn't just a party gone wrong. It was the moment the mask fell. The person I had loved as a friend revealed she was never who I thought she was. It was as if I suddenly had to reevaluate everything. Every small detail, every significant memory. When I finally finished cleaning, I sat down on the couch, staring into the emptiness. The weight of the disappointment was almost unbearable. And yet, deep down, I knew that this night hadn't finished revealing all its painful truths. The party was over, but its remnants were scattered everywhere, both physically and emotionally. The floor was littered with crushed confetti, empty glasses perched on furniture, wine stains on the couch, and balloons already starting to deflate. But none of this compared to how I felt inside. The weight of that night pressed down on me, as if every memory added another brick to the load. And at the center of it all was Clara. Clara had always been more than a friend to me. She was my confidant, the person I trusted with my most profound moments and my most vulnerable secrets. When everything around me seemed to crumble, she was the one I turned to. She understood me, or at least I thought she did. Our friendship had been built over years, through laughter, tears, and shared achievements. But that night everything crumbled. As I collected the party's remnants, My mind raced. I thought about how I had met Clara. It was in college when we were young, full of dreams and eager to conquer the world. She was vibrant, brimming with energy and charm, while I was more reserved, always searching for someone to ground me. Clara filled that gap. She made me feel like I had someone by my side, even on the hardest days. But as I looked back, I started to wonder, was our friendship as solid as I thought it was? Or had Clara always been the calculating, indifferent person I saw that night? Her betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in her lack of empathy, her coldness, her disregard for everything that had happened during the party. Her words from our conversation in the kitchen echoed in my mind. You always need everything to revolve around you. Maybe it's time you grow up. Each sentence cut deep. Not because they were criticisms, but because they came from someone I never imagined could think that way about me. It was as if she had been holding on to these thoughts, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash them. As the night dragged on and I sat in the silence of my apartment, I felt a void that seemed impossible to fill. Losing a friend isn't like losing an object or ending a romantic relationship. It's different. It's like losing a part of yourself, especially when that person has been present in so many significant moments in your life. I thought back to the nights Clara and I spent talking for hours, planning our lives, dreaming together. How could she just throw all that away? Her friendship had been something I thought was unbreakable, but now it lay in pieces, and there was no way to put it back together. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the scenes from the party. Her laughter on the balcony as she mocked me in front of people who barely knew me. Her dismissal of the harassment Letitia endured. Her cold response to me in the kitchen. All of it swirled in my mind, refusing to let me rest. At one point, I sat on the floor in the middle of the mess and cried. Not just any cry. It was the kind that comes from the depths of your soul, filled with pain and despair. I cried for the friendship I'd lost, for what it had meant, and for what I thought it was. I cried for the disappointment, the emptiness, and the loneliness that now seemed to occupy every corner of my heart. At the same time, a part of me felt guilty. Was Clara right? Did I really expect too much from people? Did I unknowingly place an unfair burden on others? These thoughts felt like knives, cutting me from every angle. The next day I was in a daze. I didn't have the energy to finish cleaning the house, let alone face the world outside. My phone buzzed with messages from friends asking how I was, but I couldn't muster the strength to respond. What could I say? That the party meant to celebrate my life had become the moment I lost one of the most important people in it. As the day unfolded, I started to realize that, despite everything, I had to face it. I couldn't stay trapped in the pain and disappointment. Losing Clara felt like grieving, but like any grief, I knew I'd eventually have to move forward. I decided to start with the obvious. Cleaning up the apartment. As I picked up the last remnants of the party, I found myself organizing my thoughts as well. Each glass I picked up, every stain I scrubbed, and every deflated balloon I threw away felt like a step toward understanding what had happened. And during that process, I came to an important realization. Clara didn't define me. Our friendship, as significant as it had been, wasn't the sole foundation of who I was. I still had other people around me. People who genuinely cared about me and had shown their concern and kindness amid the chaos. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of relief. Not because the pain was gone, but because I began to understand that this loss, as painful as it was, also presented an opportunity. An opportunity to reassess myself, to understand who I was without Clara, and to determine what I truly wanted in life. When I finally finished cleaning, I sat on the couch and took a deep breath. The emptiness was still there, but it felt less overwhelming. I knew it would take time to move on from that night, but I also knew it was possible. Clara had left a void in my life, but I was determined to fill it with something meaningful, something that truly deserved my energy. Now, I ask you, how many times have you held on to something or someone that no longer made sense in your life? How many times have you ignored the signs because you were afraid of letting go or facing the truth? Maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time to look within and ask yourself, what truly deserves a place in my life right now? If you've ever experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. I want to know how you dealt with disappointment and the lessons you learned from it. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Together we can learn, grow, and become stronger with every challenge.